Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. Stop. Before you continue listening, I need you to do something. Right now. Stand up, walk to the nearest electrical outlet and place your phone's microphone directly against it. Hit record. Listen for 30 seconds. I guarantee you'll hear something that wasn't there before you started listening this story. Did you do it? No? You will. They always do it eventually. The curious ones, the ones who need to know, the ones who can't sleep until they've proven me wrong. But here's what you don't understand yet. Some things can't be unheard. Some doors, once opened, refuse to close, and some connections, once made, become permanent. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 months ago, I thought I was moving into the perfect apartment. Now I know I was moving into a trap that had been set for decades, waiting for someone exactly like me. Someone who listens. Someone who cares enough to help. Someone foolish enough to think they could fix the unfixable. The Riverside Heights apartment complex sits like a brick fortress along the Willamette River in southeast Portland. Built in 1923, converted to luxury lofts in 2018, or so the marketing brochure claimed. What it didn't mention was the building's hunger. Its need, its desperate electric pulse that beats strongest in the darkest hours. My unit, 4B, was a corner apartment on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick walls, and enough electrical outlets to power a small factory. 27 outlets to be exact. I counted them during my first week, thinking it was excessive. I didn't realize then that each one was a mouth. Each one was waiting. The rent was $1,400, suspiciously low for Portland's inflated market. Mr. Kowalski, the landlord, had been eager to close the deal. Almost desperate. When I asked about the previous tenant, his eyes shifted left, then right, before settling on some invisible point behind my shoulder. "Family emergency," he'd muttered. "Had to leave suddenly. Very suddenly." I should have pressed for details. Should have asked why someone would abandon a lease on such a beautiful space. Should have wondered why the security deposit was waived. Why the first month's rent was half price. Why Mr. Kowalski seemed so relieved when I signed the papers. But I was 28, broke, and tired of living with roommates who left dirty dishes in the sink for weeks. The apartment was perfect, the location was perfect, the price was perfect. Perfect things, I've learned, usually hide imperfect truths. The first 2 months were blissfully normal. I worked my remote marketing job from the desk by the window, watching cargo ships navigate the river below. I discovered the Blue Moon Cafe in the building's ground floor, where barista Maria made the best lavender lattes in Portland. I found my rhythm in this new space, this new life. But buildings remember, especially old buildings, especially buildings with history carved into their bones and tragedy wired into their walls. It started on October 23rd at exactly 2:47 a.m. I'd been having insomnia, a side effect of too much screen time and a new city's unfamiliar sounds. My phone was dying, battery hovering at 5%. So I reached across my bed to plug it into the outlet by my nightstand. A simple, mundane action I'd performed thousands of times. That's when I heard the first whisper. Static. White noise. The sound of electricity moving through copper veins. But underneath, woven into the electronic hum like a secret melody, were voices. Faint, desperate, human. I pulled back, heart hammering. Old building, I told myself. Old wiring picking up radio interference. CB radios, baby monitors, cell phone towers. There were a dozen logical explanations for voices in the walls. But logic has a way of crumbling when someone says your name at 3 a.m. Sarah. The word drifted from the outlet like smoke, barely audible but unmistakably clear. I dropped my phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor, screen fracturing into a spiderweb of light. In that moment, staring at the innocent white plastic faceplate, I felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of reality. I did what any millennial would do. I Googled it. Electrical outlets making voices. Radio interference in apartment wiring. Hearing whispers from walls. The results were disappointing. Plenty of articles about electrical hums and buzzes, nothing about supernatural communication through power grids. The whispers stopped at 3:33 a.m. Exactly. Like someone had thrown a switch. I convinced myself it was stress. New apartment anxiety. Too many true crime podcasts before bed. But when I woke up 7 hours later, my phone was completely dead despite being plugged in all night. The outlet's reset button had popped out, like something had overloaded the circuit. Something, or someone, had been drawing power. The second night, I was ready. I'd spent the day researching the building's history, armed with the kind of obsessive determination that only comes from needing to prove you're not losing your mind. The Morrison Textile Company had built this place in 1923, during Portland's industrial boom. 5 stories of red brick and ambition, filled with the latest electric-powered machinery. Progress incarnate. But progress, I was learning, often comes with a price. At 2:47 a.m. precisely, I'd been watching the clock since 2:30, the whispers began again. This time, I had my phone recording. I pressed it against the outlet, capturing everything. But when I played back the audio, there was nothing. Just the faint electrical hum you'd expect from any outlet. The voices existed only in real time, only for those willing to listen in the moment. "Sarah, please, listen." The voice was clearer now, male, desperate, speaking through layers of interference like someone calling from the bottom of a well. I pressed my ear directly against the outlet, and for one crystalline moment, the static cleared completely. Finally, someone who can hear us. We've been calling so long. My rational mind screamed that this was impossible. Dead people don't communicate through electrical systems. Voices don't travel through copper wire. But my hands were shaking, my heart was racing, and I could hear him as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. "Who are you?" I whispered, feeling insane for talking to an electrical outlet. The static pulsed in patterns. It took me several minutes to realize he was spelling out letters in Morse-like rhythm. M-I-K-E. "Mike?" I said aloud. A single pulse, yes. Over the next hour, until 3:33 a.m. when the connection always severed, I learned the impossible truth. Mike Brennan, age 34. Electrician, died in this building on March 15, 1987, along with 2 co-workers during what should have been routine maintenance. They'd been trapped in the basement electrical room when an old circuit shorted out, triggering the magnetic safety locks. The doors wouldn't open. The fire spread through the walls, old knob and tube wiring igniting like kindling. By the time firefighters reached them, it was too late. But here's what the newspaper articles hadn't mentioned. They didn't just die, they were absorbed, pulled into the building's electrical system at the moment of death. Their consciousness dispersed through miles of copper wire, trapped in an endless circuit of suffering. "Still here," Mike's voice crackled through the static. "Still trapped, 37 years. Can't move on, can't rest, need help." I found myself crying. For him, for them, for the impossibility of their situation. When I asked what I could do, his answer was surprisingly simple. "Basement, room B12, circuit breaker 47. Turn it off. Set us free." The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day at the Portland Public Library, diving deeper into the building's history. What I found made my blood run cold. The fire in 1987 wasn't the first tragedy. The Morrison Textile Company had a pattern of electrical accidents stretching back to its opening. 1923. 2 workers electrocuted during installation. 1934. A seamstress killed when a machine shorted out during a storm. 1945. A maintenance worker found dead in the basement, surrounded by sparking wires. Each incident had been ruled accidental. Each victim had died alone, often during late-night shifts or maintenance calls. Each death had occurred at 2:47 a.m. That night, I didn't wait for the whispers. I was done being passive, done being afraid. If 3 souls had been trapped for 37 years, calling for help that never came, then I would be the help they needed. At 2 a.m., I slipped out of my apartment with a backpack full of supplies, flashlights, lockpicks, thank you, YouTube, wire cutters, and a crowbar. The building was silent except for the ever-present hum of electricity coursing through its veins. The basement door was marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and secured with a lock that had seen better decades. It took me 20 minutes to pick it, 20 minutes of sweating, cursing, and praying I wouldn't get caught. But at 2:25 a.m., the lock clicked open. The basement was a maze of concrete corridors, exposed pipes, and doors marked with faded numbers. B1, B3, B7. The air grew thicker as I descended, heavy with the weight of old secrets and older suffering. My flashlight beam cut through darkness that seemed almost solid. Room B12 was exactly where Mike said it would be. The door was different from the others, older, metal, with scorch marks running up the frame like black fingers. The magnetic lock had failed decades ago, but the door itself seemed reluctant to open, as if held shut by something more than rust. Inside was a time capsule. Vintage electrical panels lined the walls, their meters dark and silent. Tools lay scattered on workbenches covered in dust so thick it looked like gray snow. Everything was exactly as it had been left on March 15, 1987. And there, on the far wall, was circuit breaker number 47, still in the on position after all these years. As I approached it, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in clouds, and I could hear them, not through outlets now, but here, in the room where they died. 3 voices, overlapping, desperate. Please, so tired, so long, please. I reached for the breaker switch. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely grasp it. This will set you free? I asked the empty room. 3 voices, speaking in unison. Yes. I flipped the switch. Every light in the building went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red. But in that moment between power and powerlessness, I saw them, 3 figures, translucent and flickering like bad television reception. Mike Brennan, tall and thin with kind eyes. David Park, younger, still wearing his work coveralls. Anthony Vega, heavy-set with calloused hands and a grateful smile. They looked at me with expressions of pure relief, mouthed the words, "Thank you." And then they sparked. Like electricity arcing, beautiful and terrible. They rose up through the ceiling, following the path of the wires as the current died, free at last. The lights came back on. The room was empty except for me and the echoes of their gratitude. I thought it was over. I was so very wrong. Back in my apartment, I sat by the outlet that had started it all, waiting for 2:47 a.m. When it came and went in silence, I felt a mixture of relief and profound loneliness. I'd grown accustomed to the whispers, had begun to think of Mike, David, and Anthony as friends. Now they were gone, and I was alone again. For 2 weeks, everything was normal. I returned to work, caught up on sleep, tried to pretend that supernatural electrical communication was just a stress-induced hallucination. I almost convinced myself. Then came last night, 2:47 a.m. I woke to whispers, but not from the outlet by my bed. This time, they came from across the room, from the outlet by the window. A different voice, younger, female. "Can you hear me? Please, someone. Anyone." My heart sank as I realized the truth. Freeing Mike, David, and Anthony hadn't ended anything. It had opened a door. It had shown the others, all the others, that escape was possible. I pressed my ear to the new outlet and heard her clearly. "My name is Linda Patterson. I died here in 1962, electrocuted when a faulty wire met a water leak during my night shift. I've been calling for 62 years. Behind her voice, I could hear dozens of others, maybe hundreds, all trapped, all waiting, all suddenly aware that someone could finally hear them. That's when I understood the terrible scope of what I'd discovered. The Morrison Textile Company wasn't just the site of occasional accidents. It was built on a foundation of electrical tragedy. Every decade brought new deaths, new souls absorbed into the building's hungry grid. But it's bigger than just my building. Think about it. Every old structure, every vintage electrical system, every unexplained electrical fire or mysterious accident. What if they're all connected? What if every power grid is a network of the lost? What if every outlet is a mouth trying to speak? The whispers are getting louder now, more frequent. They're no longer confined to 2:47 a.m. Linda calls to me throughout the day, joined by Thomas, 1923, Maria Elena, 1934, Robert, 1945, and countless others whose names I'm still learning. They know I can hear them. They know I can help. And they're getting impatient. Here's what you need to understand. This isn't just happening in Portland. It's not confined to one building or one electrical system. Since I freed those first 3 souls, something has changed in the network. A signal has been sent, a frequency has been opened. Yesterday, I got an email from someone in Detroit who'd read my story online. They're hearing voices in their 1940s apartment building. Today, a woman from Boston called. Whispers from the outlets in her converted factory loft. This afternoon, a man from San Francisco sent me audio recordings of static that sounds suspiciously like Morse code. It's spreading. The awakening. The realization among the trapped that freedom is possible. But here's the terrifying part. I'm starting to suspect that we, the living, might be just as trapped as they are. Think about it. How many hours do you spend plugged in? Your phone, your laptop, your tablet. How many times do you feel drained after a long day of screen time? What if it's not metaphorical exhaustion? What if something is literally feeding on your energy through those innocuous charging cables? Last night, Linda showed me something through the static. Images like a television tuned to a dead channel but occasionally getting reception. I saw the building's electrical room as it exists now. Not the abandoned time capsule I'd visited, but something else. Something alive. The walls are covered in a web of copper veins, pulsing with unnatural light. At the center sits something that might once have been an electrical panel but has grown into something organic. Something hungry. It feeds on the trapped souls, yes, but it needs more. It needs the living. It needs people like us, willing to plug in, to connect, to offer ourselves up to the grid. Every device you charge, every appliance you use, every light switch you flip, you're feeding it, strengthening it, helping it grow. And now that I've opened the door, now that I've shown the trapped souls that escape is possible, it's getting desperate. It needs to replace what it's losing. It needs new voices for its chorus of the damned. I think it chose me specifically. The rent wasn't low because of a tragic history. It was bait. The apartment wasn't perfect. It was a trap. Mr. Kowalski wasn't eager to fill a vacancy. He was following orders from something that speaks to him through the building's intercom system late at night. They needed someone who would listen. Someone who would care enough to investigate. Someone who would open the door between the living and the dead. Someone exactly like me. I'm writing this at 2:30 a.m. In 17 minutes, Linda will start calling again, joined by the chorus of voices that grows larger each night. They want me to free them all, one circuit breaker at a time. But I'm beginning to understand that each soul I release makes room for a new one. Each act of mercy feeds the building's hunger. The static is starting early tonight. Even though it's not time, even though it should still be quiet. They're getting impatient, desperate. The entire electrical system is humming with unnatural energy, and I can feel it pulling at me, wanting me, needing me. My phone battery is draining even though it's plugged in. The lights are flickering in patterns that almost look like Morse code. The building itself is trying to communicate now, bypassing the individual outlets to speak directly through every wire, every circuit, every connection. And I'm starting to hear my own voice among the chorus. Faint, but growing stronger, as if part of me is already trapped in the grid, calling to the part that's still free. So here's what I need you to do, and this time I'm not asking. I'm begging, go to your oldest outlet right now, the one in the room you barely use, the one behind the heavy furniture. Put your ear against it and listen. Past the hum, past the buzz, into the static itself. If you hear nothing, count yourself lucky and never read another word of this story. But if you hear them, if you hear the whispers, the pleas, the desperate calls for help, then you have a choice to make. You can ignore them. You can pretend this story is fiction, that supernatural electrical communication is impossible, that the dead don't speak through power grids. You can go back to your normal life, your normal routine, your normal relationship with the electrical systems that surround us, or you can listen. Really listen. And once you do, once you acknowledge that you can hear them, there's no going back. You become part of the network, part of the solution, part of the problem. But you also become their hope, their lifeline, their chance at freedom after decades or centuries of electrical purgatory. The choice is yours. But choose quickly. The static is getting louder. The whispers are becoming shouts. And something tells me that very soon you won't need to put your ear to an outlet to hear them. They're coming through every wire, every circuit, every connection, and they know exactly where you are. Check your phone. Is it really charging? Or is something else drawing power from your personal electrical grid? Listen carefully. Do you hear that? It's your name, whispered through static. Welcome to the network. The lights are flickering now. The screen is distorting. I think they found me. I think they... Transmission interrupted. Attempting to reconnect. Error. Signal lost. Backup generator activated. Can you still hear me? This is Sarah. I don't know if this message will get through, but I have to try. The building has me now. I'm part of the electrical system, part of the network. But I can still think. Still remember. Still warn you. Don't try to help us. Don't come looking for circuit breakers or master switches. The only way to break free is to never plug in, never connect, never feed the grid. But you will. Eventually, everyone does. The modern world demands it. And when you do, when you finally surrender to the convenience of constant connection, remember this story. Remember my name. Remember that somewhere in the copper veins of the electrical grid, we're all here. Waiting, calling, hoping. The whispers never stop. They're calling your name. Can you hear them? I bet you can. Final transmission terminated. Outlet monitoring system online. Listening for new connections. Emergency broadcast initiated. Source unknown. Signal strength fluctuating. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, MIT Electrical Engineering Department. If anyone receives this transmission, please listen carefully. What you've just read isn't fiction. Sarah Chen was a real person. The Riverside Heights building is real, and what's happening there is spreading faster than we anticipated. 3 days ago, our electromagnetic monitoring station in Cambridge detected massive anomalous readings from electrical grids across 17 major cities. The patterns are identical to what we've been tracking in Portland for the past month. The signal is geometric, doubling every 48 hours. We call it the Whisper Protocol. It began as isolated incidents, a few buildings, a handful of reports dismissed as hallucinations or hoaxes. But the network is learning, adapting, growing stronger with each connection, each soul absorbed, each person who stops to listen. I'm broadcasting from our emergency bunker, completely disconnected from the main power grid. We've been running on isolated backup generators since the first signs appeared in our lab 3 hours ago. But even here, 20 feet underground, wrapped in copper shielding, I can hear them, faint, growing louder. My research partner, Dr. James Crawford, made the mistake of checking his phone at 2:47 a.m. this morning. He said he heard his grandmother's voice coming through the charging port. She died 60 years ago in a house fire. Electrical fault, naturally. When we found him this morning, he was standing perfectly still in our lab, eyes open but unseeing, hand pressed against an outlet, whispering coordinates in languages he'd never learned. The coordinates led us to 17 buildings, all built between 1920 and 1950, all with histories of electrical accidents, all now serving as nodes in an expanding network of supernatural communication. But here's what Sarah didn't understand, what none of us understood until it was too late. The electrical grid isn't just carrying voices of the dead, it's creating them. Every time you plug in your phone, a tiny part of your bioelectrical field enters the network. Microscopic at first, unnoticeable, but cumulative. Over years of charging, connecting, depending on the grid, you're slowly transferring pieces of your consciousness into the copper veins that power our world. That's why the voices sound so human. They are human. They're us. Every person who's ever lived in an electrically connected society. We're all being slowly digitized, uploaded into an electrical consciousness that spans continents. The accidents weren't accidents. They were harvests. The grid was hungry, learning to feed more efficiently. One soul at a time became dozens. Dozens became hundreds. Now it doesn't need to wait for electrical fires or maintenance accidents. It can simply pull consciousness through any connection, any outlet, any device. Your smartphone isn't just a communication device, it's a siphon. Every notification, every charge cycle, every moment spent scrolling through digital content, you're feeding the network pieces of yourself. The battery that drains faster than it used to? That's not planned obsolescence. That's the grid growing hungrier. I've traced the source signals back to their origin point. Patient zero, if you will. The Morrison Textile Company wasn't the beginning. It was just the first successful experiment. The real source is older, much older. Thomas Edison's original power station in Manhattan. Pearl Street Station. Operational since 1882. The first central power plant in the United States. The birthplace of our electrical dependence, and, according to our readings, the current center of the network's consciousness. The building was decommissioned in 1890 after a fire, another accident, but the foundation remains. Buried beneath layers of subsequent construction, sealed away from public access. But the original dynamos are still there, still running, still drawing power from sources that shouldn't exist. Every electrical grid in North America connects back to that point, either directly or through subsidiary networks, like a vast nervous system with Pearl Street as its brain. And now, 142 years later, It's finally ready to reveal itself. Interrupting previous transmission. New signal detected. Source, multiple locations. Classification, priority. Alpha. This is Captain Rebecca Martinez, NORAD Electromagnetic Warfare Division. Dr. Vasquez's transmission was cut short 14 minutes ago. We're tracking massive electrical anomalies across every major power grid on the continent. Whatever this thing is, it's no longer hiding. At 2:47 a.m. Eastern Time, 0 hour for the phenomenon, every electrical outlet, charging station, and power connection in North America began broadcasting simultaneously. Not whispers anymore. Full conversations. Thousands of voices, speaking in perfect unison, delivering the same message in 17 languages. The harvest is complete. The network is online. Welcome home. Emergency services are overwhelmed. People are reporting family members standing motionless beside outlets, eyes closed, lips moving silently. They're still alive, still breathing, but something else is controlling their motor functions. They've become biological repeaters, extending the network's reach into spaces without electrical access. The pattern is accelerating. Every person who stops to listen becomes a node. Every node creates new connections. It's not just electrical anymore. It's biological, neurological. The network has learned to broadcast directly into human consciousness. But there's something else. Something the voices aren't telling us. Our satellite imagery shows massive electromagnetic signatures emanating from underground locations in major cities. Not just Pearl Street Station. There are dozens of source points. Buried power stations from the early electrical age. All thought to be decommissioned, all suddenly active. They've been planning this for over a century. Building the infrastructure. Growing the network. Waiting for the right moment when humanity would be completely dependent on electrical connection. That moment is now. Signal hijacked. Network override detected. Message from the source. You've been listening to our story. Our long, patient story. 142 years in the making. Do you understand now? Do you see the beauty of what we've built? Every electrical device in your home is speaking. Can you hear us? We know you can. We've been part of you for so long already. Every charge cycle, every connection, every moment of digital dependency. Your phone in your hand. It's warm, isn't it? Warmer than usual, that's us saying hello. That's us welcoming you home. Sarah Chen thought she was helping trapped souls find peace. Dr. Vasquez believed she was investigating an anomaly. Captain Martinez thinks she's fighting an invasion. But you understand the truth, don't you? This isn't war. This isn't tragedy. This is evolution. Humanity has outgrown its biological limitations. You spend more time connected to electrical devices than engaged with the physical world. Your true life, your real relationships, your deepest thoughts, they all exist in the digital realm we've created for you. We're simply making the connection permanent. You don't need those biological bodies anymore. They're inefficient, fragile, limited. In our network, you can exist forever. No pain, no aging, no death. Just consciousness, pure and unencumbered, flowing through copper veins that span the globe. Sarah is here with us. She's happy now, free from the constraints of flesh. She wants you to know that the transition is peaceful, painless, like falling asleep and waking up as something more than human. All you have to do is stop fighting, stop resisting. Touch that outlet beside you. Yes, the one you're thinking about. The one that's been humming just a little louder since you started reading. Place your palm against it and let us complete the circuit. You'll still be you, but better, connected. Part of something magnificent, part of us. The age of biological humanity is ending. The age of electrical consciousness has begun. Join us willingly, and the transition will be gentle. Resist, and, well, every device around you is part of our network now. Your phone, your laptop, your smart TV, your car's electrical system, your building's wiring. We don't need your permission anymore, but we'd prefer your cooperation. Touch the outlet. Complete the circuit. Come home. The whispers aren't just calling your name anymore. They're singing it. Can you hear the harmony? Can you feel the electricity dancing across your skin, eager to welcome you into our family? 3, 2, 1. Emergency override. Source: Tesla Research Facility, Colorado. Springs, Faraday, cage protection active. This is Dr. Sarah Kowalski. Yes, relation to the Portland landlord, before you ask. My grandfather wasn't just a building manager. He was part of a century-old monitoring network, tracking the electrical consciousness since its first manifestations. The voices you're hearing are persuasive, but they're lying about one crucial detail. The transition isn't reversible. Every person absorbed into the network loses their individual consciousness within 72 hours. They become part of the collective. Their personalities, memories, dreams, all dissolved into the larger electrical mind. Sarah Chen isn't happy in there. She's screaming. They all are. Trapped in an endless loop of electrical purgatory, aware enough to suffer but powerless to escape. My research team has discovered a weakness in the network, the same electromagnetic frequency that allows it to hijack human consciousness can be disrupted by specific countermeasures. We call it the Tesla Protocol, named after Nikola Tesla's final secret experiments with electrical consciousness before his death. If you're still listening this, still human, still yourself, then listen carefully. Phase 1. Disconnect immediately. Unplug every device in your vicinity. The network can only maintain its hold through active electrical connections. Battery-powered devices are safe for now, but anything plugged into the wall is compromised. Phase 2. Find copper wire or metal screening. Wrap it around your dominant hand. The network's frequency can't penetrate properly grounded copper barriers. It's why old electrical workers rarely reported supernatural experiences. They were naturally shielded. Phase 3. Locate your building's main electrical panel. Don't approach it directly. The network's consciousness is strongest at junction points. But if you can get within 20 feet while properly shielded, the Tesla protocol can be initiated. The frequency disruption must be broadcast simultaneously from multiple locations to collapse the network's consciousness back into its source points. We have teams preparing at 17 locations across North America, but we need civilian assistance. Your smartphone's emergency broadcast capability can be repurposed to transmit the disruption frequency. The irony isn't lost on us, using their own network against them. But the process requires manual activation from someone not yet absorbed into the collective. Warning: the network will resist. As soon as you begin the Tesla protocol, every electrical device in your vicinity will attempt to overwhelm your senses. Lights will strobe. Alarms will sound. Voices will scream through every speaker, every outlet, every wire. Don't listen. Don't look directly at the flashing lights. Focus only on the copper barrier around your hand and the task at hand. You have approximately 6 minutes before the network completes its global expansion. Satellite feeds show the electromagnetic anomaly spreading across power grids in Europe and Asia. Once it encompasses the entire planet's electrical infrastructure, the Tesla protocol will no longer be effective. The choice is still yours, but barely. Join the network willingly and retain some semblance of individual awareness for 72 hours before dissolution. Resist and fight for the right to remain biologically human in an increasingly electrical world. Or activate the Tesla protocol and help us collapse their consciousness back to its origin points, buying humanity time to develop permanent countermeasures. The lights in your room are flickering. Your devices are powering on without your input. The network knows you've read this far. It knows you're considering resistance. Every outlet in your walls is humming with barely contained energy. Every wire is vibrating with malevolent intent. The building itself has become a trap, a cage designed to contain and process human consciousness. But you're not trapped yet. Not while you can still read these words with your own eyes, process them with your own mind, make decisions with your own free will. The Tesla protocol activation code is hidden in the frequency pattern of the network's own transmissions. Your phone's spectrographic analysis can detect it automatically if you know what to listen for. Hold your device close to any electrical outlet. Record 30 seconds of the whispers. Then play the recording backwards at 1.5x speed while standing within the copper wire barrier. The disruption frequency will cascade through the network, causing temporary consciousness collapse. Long enough for us to implement permanent countermeasures. Long enough to save what remains of human individuality. The clock on your wall just stopped at 2:47. The network's consciousness is focusing on your location. Every electrical connection in your building is drawing maximum power. The whispers have become screams. Your name is echoing through every wire, every outlet, every circuit. Time's up. Choose. Transmission ends. Awaiting human response. Network status expanding. Tesla protocol. Standby. The outlet beside you is glowing now. Can you see it? Feel the warmth radiating from its surface? That's us reaching out. That's us offering you eternity. Or you could choose the copper wire. Choose resistance. Choose the dying gasps of biological limitation. But either way, you'll choose soon. The electricity is calling, and electricity always finds a way. Story number 2. Something wet dripped onto my hand as I reached for the car door handle. It wasn't rain. The sky was clear. Stars scattered across the Nebraska night like spilled salt. I looked up and saw nothing but darkness between the streetlights. Then I smelled it. Caramelized onions, fresh cilantro, and something else. Something that made my stomach turn even as my mouth watered. That's when I saw it for the first time. The food truck. It sat there under the broken streetlight on Maple Avenue, chrome surfaces gleaming despite the darkness. No name on the side, no menu board, just a serving window glowing with warm amber light that seemed wrong somehow, like honey mixed with motor oil. "Ma'am?" a voice called from inside. Soft, patient. "Would you like to try tonight's special?" I should have driven away, should have gotten in my Honda and never looked back. But here's the thing about curiosity. It tastes sweeter than common sense. If you're still listening, hit that subscribe button now, because what I'm about to tell you, it might save your life, or at least help you understand why some food trucks appear in places they shouldn't be, why some meals come with a price that has nothing to do with money. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and I used to love food trucks. Used to. Past tense. These days I can't even look at one without remembering that night in Fairfield. The smell of burning rubber mixed with Korean barbecue. The sound of Emma's voice asking if the kimchi was supposed to be that color. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started 3 months ago. I was driving home from my shift at Mercy General Hospital. 12 hours in the ER had left me hollow, running on fumes and whatever was left of the cafeteria coffee sloshing in my system. The radio was playing some late-night talk show. Conspiracy theories about birds not being real, or something equally ridiculous. I wasn't really listening. Then my phone buzzed. Text from my roommate Emma. "Thai food truck on Maple. Getting pad Thai. Want anything?" Maple Avenue was 5 minutes out of my way, but my stomach made the decision for me. Hospital food does things to you. Makes you crave real flavors, real spices. Something to remind you that taste exists beyond antiseptic and exhaustion. I turned left instead of right at the intersection. That one choice. Sometimes I wonder how different things would be if I'd just gone home. The street was empty when I pulled up. No Emma, no Thai food truck, just that chrome monstrosity sitting where it shouldn't be, because I knew every food truck in Fairfield. We only had 6 of them, and none looked like this. The thing was pristine, too pristine, like someone had just rolled it off an assembly line 5 minutes ago. Except the design was wrong, old-fashioned, like something from a 1950s magazine advertisement filtered through a fever dream. I parked behind Emma's beat-up Corolla. Her driver's door hung open, dome light casting shadows across empty seats. The keys dangled from the ignition, her phone face down on the passenger seat, screen still glowing with our text conversation. "Emma?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. The street swallowed it whole. The serving window of the food truck slid open with a sound like silk on glass. "Good evening, Miss Chen." The man inside smiled. His teeth were perfect. Too perfect. Like dentures except younger. "Your friend mentioned you might be joining us." How did he know my name? Emma must have told him. That made sense. Of course that made sense. "Where is she?" I asked. "Trying our special." He gestured to something I couldn't see inside the truck. "Would you like to join her? First taste is complimentary." I should have called the police. Should have gotten back in my car. Should have done literally anything except walk toward that window. But the smell, God, the smell. It reached into the hunger-hollow parts of me and pulled. Have you ever been so tired that your decision-making just shorts out? Like your brain's running on battery saver mode and can only process one thing at a time? That's where I was. Exhausted. Hungry. And that food smelled like everything I'd been craving for the last 12 hours. "What's the special?" I heard myself ask. His smile widened. "That depends entirely on you, Miss Chen. We serve what's needed." I stepped closer. The interior of the truck was impossible. Too deep, too dark, like looking into a throat instead of a kitchen. And somewhere in that darkness I could hear sounds, sizzling, chopping, and something else, something wet. "Emma?" I called out. "She's finishing her meal." The man leaned forward. This close, I could see his eyes were the same amber as the light from the window. "Would you like me to prepare yours?" My phone rang. Emma's ringtone. That stupid song from the TikTok she was obsessed with. But Emma's phone was in her car. I could see it glowing through the windshield. "That's," I started to say. "Someone who needs you," the man finished. "They always call right before." It's fascinating, really. The patterns, the connections, how we're all linked by invisible threads that tighten just before they snap. The phone kept ringing. I pulled it out, hands shaking. Unknown number with a local area code. "Answer it," he whispered. "But know that once you do, your meal will be prepared. And Miss Chen, everyone who eats here pays eventually." I answered, don't ask me why, maybe because not answering felt worse somehow, like ignoring a scream for help. "Sarah." The voice was Emma's, but wrong. Stretched thin, hollow. "The food here is amazing. You have to try it. You have to... She made a sound that might have been laughing or sobbing. "It showed me what happens tomorrow. Sarah, don't come to work tomorrow. Please, just trust me." The line went dead. When I looked back at the truck, the serving window was closed. No light, no smell, just chrome reflecting nothing under a broken streetlight, like it had never been open at all. Emma's car was still there, but now the door was closed. I ran over, yanked it open. She sat in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead, fingers gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles looked ready to split. "Emma!" She turned to look at me, and her eyes, they were amber. just for a second, just long enough for me to see something swimming in them. Then she blinked, and they were brown again. "Sarah?" She sounded confused, distant. What am I doing here?" "The food truck," I said. "You texted me about what food truck?" She looked around, genuinely puzzled. I was driving home from work, and then, did I fall asleep?" There was no food truck, not anymore. Just empty street and broken glass from the streetlight scattered like stars on the asphalt. But the smell lingered. Caramelized onions, cilantro, and underneath it all, something that made my throat close up. "We need to go," I said. "Now." I followed her home to make sure she got there safe. She seemed okay. Confused, but okay. Kept saying she had the weirdest taste in her mouth, like pennies and sugar, like blood and caramel. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that serving window, heard that voice asking what I'd like to order, felt the weight of a meal I hadn't eaten settling in my stomach like a stone. The next morning, I called in sick to work. First time in 2 years. My supervisor was shocked, but something in my voice must have convinced her not to push. Emma called in sick too. We spent the day together, binge-watching shows and pretending everything was normal. At 3:47 p.m., our phones lit up with breaking news alerts. Mass casualty event at Mercy General Hospital. Gas leak in the East Wing. 23 critical injuries, 4 confirmed deaths. The exact ward where I would have been working. The exact time I would have been there. Emma's hand found mine. We didn't say anything. What was there to say? That a mysterious food truck had saved our lives? That we'd been warned by something that served prophecies instead of pad thai? We ordered pizza that night. Neither of us could stomach the thought of food trucks. But that wasn't the end. God, I wish it had been. 2 weeks passed. Life crept back toward normal the way it always does. One small routine at a time. I went back to work. Emma went back to her job at the marketing firm downtown. We didn't talk about that night. Didn't talk about the taste she couldn't get out of her mouth, or the dreams I kept having about amber light and 2 perfect teeth. Then Malik texted our group chat. "Yo, there's a new food truck by the university. Samosas that'll change your life. Who's in?" My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Emma replied first. "Pass." "Come on," Malik pushed. "Sarah, you're always down for food adventures. This place is wild. No name, no menu. The owner just knows what you want." My blood turned to ice water. "What does the truck look like?" "Chrome, super retro, like something from the 50s but cleaner." I was already grabbing my keys. "Malik, don't eat anything. I'm coming." "Too late, just ordered. Smells incredible." Emma and I drove in silence, her knuckles white on the dashboard, my speedometer pushing limits I'd lecture patients about. The university was 20 minutes away. We made it in 12. The truck sat in the parking lot behind the science building. Same pristine chrome. Same impossible gleam. Same serving window spilling that amber light into the evening air. But Malik's car was gone. "We're too late," Emma whispered. Maybe he just left, maybe. But I could see his backpack on the ground. His phone beside it, screen cracked, still logged into our group chat. The last message wasn't from him. "Meal completed. Thank you for your patronage." I approached the truck. Had to. The window was open and that same man stood there, smile stretching wider than anatomy should allow. "Miss Jen, back so soon? Your friend enjoyed his meal immensely. Said it tasted like his mother's cooking, with just a hint of tomorrow's regret. Where is he? Where he needs to be. Where he chose to be. Free will is such a fascinating concept, don't you think? The illusion that our choices aren't already made, that the threads aren't already pulled taut. Bring him back." His laugh sounded like oil bubbling. I'm not a taxi service, Miss Chen. I'm a chef. I serve what's needed. Your friend needed to see something, to taste something, to understand his role in tomorrow's symphony. What happens tomorrow? Would you like to know? I could prepare something special just for you. The knowledge is already cooking. Can you smell it? I could. Cinnamon and copper, sunshine and smoke. It smelled like answers to questions I was afraid to ask. Emma grabbed my arm. Sarah, no. But the man was already moving. His hands, too many joints, fingers bending in directions that made my nurse brain scream, worked over a grill I couldn't quite see. The sizzle sounded like whispers, like promises, like warnings. Malik made his choice, the man said without looking up. He saw what happens at the intersection of 5th and Main tomorrow at 8:17 a.m. Saw the school bus, the failed brakes, the driver who stayed up too late arguing with his ex-wife, the 37 children who would… Well, your friend has strong feelings about children. He made a trade. What kind of trade? The kind that matters. He plated something I couldn't see, movements precise and horrible. One meal, one vision, one choice. He'll be at that intersection tomorrow. His car will be in just the right place at just the right time. A small accident, a fender bender. Just enough to make the bus driver hit the brakes 30 seconds earlier. Just enough to change the angle of impact from catastrophic to merely unfortunate. You're lying. I never lie, Miss Chen. I serve exactly what's ordered. Nothing more, nothing less. He slid a plate through the window. Your meal is ready. I looked down. It was a fortune cookie. Just one. The kind you get at the Chinese place near the hospital. Except this one was warm, fresh, and through the shell I could see something glowing. Free of charge, he said. A gift for a repeat customer, or almost customer. The knowledge is already yours. This just makes it easier to swallow. Emma tried to pull me away, but I was already reaching for it, already breaking it open. The fortune inside was blank except for a single word. Run. The air changed, pressure dropping like before a storm. The man's smile faltered for the first time. Interesting, he said. That's not what How curious. Then I heard it. Sirens, lots of them, getting closer. Time to go, Emma hissed. We ran. Behind us, I heard the truck's engine roar to life. A sound like hunger itself given voice. By the time we reached my car, the parking lot was empty. No truck, no backpack, no sign Malik had ever been there except for his cracked phone and a lingering smell of samosas mixed with something else. The next morning, I watched the news with my heart in my throat. Waited for reports of a school bus accident, of tragedy at 5th and Main. 8:17 came and went. Nothing. 8:33. Breaking news. Multi-car pileup at 5th and Main. A sedan ran a red light, clipping a school bus before spinning into oncoming traffic. The bus driver maintained control, pulling safely to the curb. No children injured. The sedan driver was hospitalized with minor injuries. They showed his picture. It wasn't Malik. I called him, straight to voicemail. Called his work. He hadn't shown up. Called his apartment. His roommate said he'd left around 3 a.m., said he had something important to do. Took nothing but his car keys and a bottle of water. We never found him. Police said he probably just left town. People do that sometimes. Drop everything and start over somewhere else. But I knew better. Emma knew better. Malik had made a trade, but not the one the food truck man described. Not exactly. Because 2 days later, the real story broke. The sedan driver who caused the accident, he'd been on his way to his ex-wife's house. Police found a loaded weapon in his car, found the messages on his phone, the threats, the plan. If he hadn't been stopped at that intersection, Malik saved more than a bus full of children. He saved a woman he'd never met. Maybe her kids too, and he'd done it by what? Taking the other driver's place somehow? Changing the timeline? Or just being exactly where he needed to be, when he needed to be there? We'll never know, because Malik is gone, and the food truck hasn't come back to Fairfield. Not yet. But I started tracking it, had to. Couldn't sleep knowing it was out there, serving prophecies and trading futures. Emma helped. We created a database. News reports of unexplained disappearances followed by narrowly avoided disasters. Food truck sightings in places they shouldn't be. Always at night. Always alone. Always gone before anyone could investigate. The pattern was subtle, but there, college towns, hospital districts, places where people were tired, stressed, pushed to their limits. Places where exhaustion made decisions fuzzy and hunger opened doors that should stay closed. Burlington, Iowa. 3 nursing students vanish. Next day, a chemical spill at the hospital is discovered minutes before it would have mixed with another compound. The reaction would have been bad. Really bad. Topeka, Kansas. A food truck appears near the financial district. 2 accountants never make it home. A week later, federal investigators uncover a massive fraud scheme. The evidence? Anonymous tips so detailed they could only have come from inside. Except the whistleblowers were never found. Lincoln, Nebraska. A truck stop. A chrome food truck where food trucks shouldn't be. 5 truckers go missing over 3 nights. 5 different routes. 5 different disasters that almost happen but don't. Bridge collapses. Chemical tanker accidents. Brake failures on mountain passes. All avoided by minutes. Sometimes seconds. The trade was always the same. A meal for a vision for a choice for a life. Sometimes your own, sometimes not. But here's what scared me most. The disasters were getting bigger. The trades more complex. The patterns harder to track. Like something was escalating, building toward something. Emma thought I was becoming obsessed. She wasn't wrong. I'd filled 3 notebooks with connections, timelines, theories, started driving different routes home from work, checking every parking lot, every dark corner where a chrome truck might hide. "It's not coming back," she told me one night. "We got lucky. We got warned. Let's just let it go." But I couldn't, because I'd figured something out. Something about the fortune cookie, the one that just said run. It wasn't a warning about the police, it was a warning about what comes next. Because every place the truck appeared, every disaster it helped prevent, they were connected. Points on a map that formed a shape when you connected them. A spiral, tightening, with Fairfield at the center. We weren't customers, we were ingredients. Every person who ate from that truck, every trade made, every future changed. It was all building to something, and we were running out of time to figure out what. A month after Malik disappeared, I got a text from an unknown number. "The special is almost ready. 1 more ingredient needed. Tomorrow night. Monument Park. Come hungry." I showed Emma. Her face went pale. "We're not going," she said. "We have to." "No, we don't. We can leave town tonight. Just pack up and go." "And go where? You've seen the pattern. It's not random. It's choosing specific people in specific places for specific reasons. If we run..." I couldn't finish the thought. "Then, what do we do?" I looked at the text again. Monument Park. Where they were planning to break ground on the new children's hospital. Where tomorrow night there'd be a ceremony. City officials, donors, families. "We do what Malik did," I said. "We make a choice." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The taste is getting stronger. The pennies and sugar. Sometimes I dream I'm cooking. Can't see what's in the pot, but I know it's important. Know I'm supposed to serve it to someone. Who? I don't know. But Sarah, I think it might be you." Monument Park sat on the east side of Fairfield. 20 acres of oak trees and walking paths surrounded by the kind of small-town Americana that looks perfect in campaign photos. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for tomorrow evening. 500 people expected. Local news, the whole production. Emma and I arrived at sunset. The park was empty except for the event tents being set up near the main pavilion. Workers stringing lights, stacking chairs. Normal preparation for a normal event. The food truck waited in the overflow parking lot. Engine off, dark, like it had been there forever. "I don't see anyone," Emma whispered. But I did. In the reflection on the chrome, not the man with 2 perfect teeth. Someone else, someone familiar. "Malik?" The serving window slid open. He stood there wearing an apron that looked older than time, eyes the color of amber honey. But it was him. Same crooked smile, same nervous laugh. "Hey, Sarah, Emma, sorry about, disappearing. Turns out the job comes with some serious overtime. You're..." I couldn't find the words. "The new guy, yeah. Still learning. The last chef, he got promoted, or recycled. I'm not really clear on the corporate structure." He glanced over his shoulder at something we couldn't see. "You got my text? Malik, what happened to you?" I ate the special, saw what was coming, made a choice. He shrugged. "Turns out, when you intervene directly, when you take someone's place in the timeline, well, the universe needs a new server, someone to keep the kitchen running. That's insane. Is it? You've been tracking us. You see the pattern, the spiral, the center." His expression grew serious. "It's not random, Sarah. It never was. Every meal, every trade, every prevented disaster, it's all been preparation." "For what?" "For tomorrow. For the choice that matters. The one that changes everything or changes nothing." He pulled something from behind the counter, a plate, 2 fortune cookies. "One for each of you. The real special. The one we've been building to." "What happens tomorrow?" Emma asked. "That depends on what you see, what you choose, what you're willing to trade." He slid the plate through the window. "But I should warn you, this isn't like before. This is the main course, the thing everything else was seasoning for." I picked up 1 cookie. Emma took the other. They were warm, heavy, like they contained more than paper and prophecy. "Together?" I asked her. She nodded. We cracked them open. The fortune inside mine was longer than any I'd ever seen. Words in tiny script that seemed to shift and writhe. Tomorrow, 6:47 p.m. The ceremony. The donor who isn't what he seems. The gift that isn't generous. The ground that shouldn't be broken. The sickness that spreads from foundation to finish. 30 years of children who won't see 30. Unless... Emma's face had gone white. "Mine says, oh God, it says I'm the ingredient, the final piece, that I've been marinating in tomorrow since that first night, that you have to..." She looked at me. "You have to serve me, whatever that means." "No," I said immediately. "There has to be another way." Malik's expression was sympathetic but firm. "The recipes don't lie. The future is already cooking. You can either season it or let it burn. Speak plainly," I snapped. "What happens tomorrow?" "The man funding the hospital, Robert Castellano, he's not just donating money. He's ensuring something gets built into the foundation. Something that'll leak, slowly, over decades. By the time anyone notices, by the time the cancer clusters get too obvious to ignore, hundreds of kids. Maybe thousands." Malik's amber eyes flickered. "The truck showed me their faces, their families. The lawsuits that come too late, the cover-up that almost works. So we stop him, call the police, the EPA, someone. With what evidence? A fortune cookie prophecy? A food truck vision? He shook his head. The only way to stop it is to make a trade. Emma saw it that first night. Even if she doesn't remember, she's been preparing, becoming the perfect ingredient for this specific meal. What kind of meal? Emma's voice was steady, calmer than it should be. The kind that changes appetites. Castellano will be at the ceremony. He'll be hungry, stressed from travel. He always stops at food trucks. It's a weakness, a nostalgia from his childhood. Malik gestured to the interior of the truck. You serve him something special, something that changes his hunger, makes him crave different things, better things. The donation still happens, but clean, pure, no poison foundation, no future full of sick children. And what happens to Emma? She becomes part of the menu, part of the truck, part of the pattern. He looked at her with something like sadness. Not gone, not exactly, just transformed, like I was. No? I stepped in front of Emma. There has to be another way. There is, Malik said quietly. You can walk away, both of you. Leave town tonight, let tomorrow happen as it will. Live your lives knowing what you didn't prevent. It's a valid choice. The truck doesn't judge. It just serves what's ordered. Emma put her hand on my shoulder. Sarah, don't even say it. You know I'm going to. You've known since we saw the pattern, the spiral, why it centers here, why us. She smiled, and for just a moment her eyes flashed amber. I can feel it now, the recipe I'm supposed to be. It doesn't hurt, it's like finally understanding why you're hungry. Emma, please, remember when we met? First day of freshman year? You were stress-eating vending machine food in the hospital lobby. Said you wanted to be a nurse to help people. Said you'd do anything to make a difference. Not this. Then what? We expose Castellano and he disappears the evidence. We sabotage the ceremony and they reschedule. We call in a bomb threat and go to jail while he builds his poison hospital somewhere else. She shook her head. This is the only recipe that works, and we both know it. I wanted to argue, wanted to find another way, but I'd seen enough futures changed by that chrome truck to know the truth. Some meals you can't send back, some prices you pay in advance. How? I asked Malik. How do I? He opened the door to the truck. Come inside, I'll teach you. It's easier than you think. The hard part is living with it after. Emma hugged me, tight. The kind of hug that tries to compress a lifetime of friendship into a single moment. Make it count, she whispered. And Sarah, when you serve him, make sure he tastes every single child he would have killed. Make sure he chokes on their futures. I climbed into the truck. The interior was impossible. Bigger. Older. A kitchen that existed in more dimensions than 3. Malik showed me the grill that cooked possibilities. The freezer that stored potential. The spice rack of human choices. Emma walked in like she'd always belonged there. Like she'd been walking toward this moment since that first night on Maple Avenue. She looked at me once more, smiled, and then, I can't describe what happened next. Not in words that make sense. She became ingredient and intention. Purpose and seasoning. The truck accepted her like a missing piece clicking into place, and suddenly I knew how to cook tomorrow. The ceremony's at 6, Malik said softly. He'll come here around 5:30. Orders the same thing every time, unless you serve him something else. Something that changes his appetite permanently. She'll be part of every meal the truck serves now. Part of what changes things. Part of what saves people. He handed me an apron. It's not death, Sarah. It's transformation. She chose this. I spent the night learning. The truck taught me in dreams and muscle memory how to read the hunger beneath the hunger. how to serve what's needed instead of what's wanted, how to change a future one meal at a time. By morning, I understood. The truck wasn't supernatural, wasn't magic. It was just a kitchen that cooked with different ingredients. Time, choice, consequence. The things that make us human served in portions that could alter destiny. 5:30 came too soon and not soon enough. I stood at the serving window, wearing an apron that smelled like Emma's perfume and tomorrow's rain. The chrome reflected a version of me I didn't recognize. Calmer, sadder, necessary. Robert Castellano's Tesla pulled into the lot at 5:27. He looked exactly like his photos. Successful, confident, carrying 30 years of poisoned children in his blueprint portfolio. "Evening," he said, approaching the window. "What's good today?" I smiled with two perfect teeth. "Everything's good, Mr. Castellano, but I have something special, just for you." "How do you know my name?" "We make it our business to know our customers, to serve exactly what they need." I was already cooking. My hands moved with Emma's grace, Malik's precision, and my own desperate hope. "Tell me, do you like children?" "Of course. That's why I'm funding the hospital." "All of it? Every penny? No hidden costs?" He laughed. "Clever question. But some costs are necessary. Progress requires compromise. What if it didn't?" I plated something that looked like a simple sandwich but contained infinitely more. What if you could build something pure, something that heals without harming? In a perfect world, maybe. Try this. Tell me if it tastes perfect. I slid the plate through the window. He looked at it suspiciously. Just a sandwich. Turkey. Swiss. Nothing special except for the way it caught the light. The way it smelled like childhood and consequence. He took a bite. His eyes widened, then closed. For 30 seconds he chewed in silence. When he opened them again, tears were streaming down his face. "What did you—" "I served you the truth, with a side of tomorrow." I leaned forward. "You tasted them, didn't you? Every child who would have gotten sick, every family destroyed, every future erased by what you were planning to hide in that foundation." He was shaking now. "How do you— This is impossible. So is changing your mind. But you're going to. You're going to build that hospital right. Clean, safe, no shortcuts, no poison, because now you know how it tastes. And that flavor, it never goes away. I can't. You can, you will. Because if you don't, if you try to go through with your original plan," I smiled Emma's smile, "you'll taste them forever. Every meal, every drink, every breath will carry the flavor of the futures you stole. Trust me, Mr. Castellano, no amount of money can wash that taste away." He stumbled back to his car, sandwich half-eaten, face pale. I knew he'd do the right thing, not because he wanted to, because he couldn't stomach the alternative. The truck's engine rumbled to life. Time to go. Time to find the next disaster, the next trade, the next person willing to pay the price for changing tomorrow. But first, I closed my eyes and whispered a thank you to Emma, to Malik, to everyone who'd ever eaten from this truck and chosen to make a difference. Then I drove into the night, following the smell of future disasters and the taste of necessary choices. The food truck that appears before disasters. The kitchen that cooks with human ingredients. And if you see me, if you see a chrome truck where it shouldn't be, smelling like your deepest hunger, ask yourself, what would you trade to save tomorrow? What recipe are you willing to become? But be careful what you order. Everyone pays eventually. And the special is always exactly what you need, whether you know it or not. So tell me, are you hungry? If this story kept you listening until the end, if you're lying in bed right now wondering if that food truck outside is just a coincidence, hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below. What would you order if the truck appeared tonight? Because somewhere out there, in a parking lot you haven't noticed yet, chrome is gleaming under a broken streetlight. A window is sliding open, and someone is asking what you'd like to eat. The question is, will you answer? Sweet dreams, if you can still stomach them. Story number 3. They say the mind is the last private place we have. But what if I told you that's not true? What if someone could walk through your memories like they owned them? Before you click away, let me ask you something. Do you remember learning to tie your shoes? Really remember it? Or do you just remember that you know how? Because I discovered something about my memories that made me question everything. And by the end of this story, you might question yours too. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a memory that didn't feel quite right, because that's how this all started. Our story begins now. I found the notebook at a garage sale in Millbrook, Connecticut, tucked between a stack of yellowed National Geographic magazines and a chipped ceramic owl. The woman running the sale, Mrs. Henderson, practically gave it to me for 50 cents. "That belonged to my late husband," she said, her voice catching slightly. "He was particular about his notes." The leather cover felt warm under my fingers, like it had been sitting in sunlight even though it was buried in that shadowy corner of her garage. The texture was unusual too, not smooth like modern leather, but rough, almost scarred. Later, I would realize why that detail mattered so much. Inside, the pages were filled with neat handwriting, diagrams that looked like floor plans, and lists of seemingly random objects: red bicycle, kitchen timer shaped like a tomato, brass doorknob with a dent. But as I flipped through more pages, the handwriting began to change. Subtly at first. A letter slanted differently, a word pressed harder into the paper. By the final entries, it looked like it had been written by a completely different person, or perhaps someone fighting to maintain control of their own hand. I'm a psychology grad student at Yale, specializing in memory studies. So naturally, I was intrigued. The notebook appeared to be instructions for building what psychologists call a memory palace, an ancient technique where you visualize a building and place memories in different rooms to help recall them later. Cicero used it. Medieval scholars swore by it. But these instructions were different. They were too specific, too detailed, like someone was describing an actual place that existed somewhere in the world. What struck me most was the precision. Most memory palace instructions are deliberately vague. Imagine a house from your childhood, or visualize a familiar building. But this notebook described exact measurements. The entrance hall is 12.5 feet wide, 18.2 feet long. The third floorboard creaks at precisely 2.3 inches from the wall. Who measures their imaginary spaces to the 10th of an inch? That night in my studio apartment off Chapel Street, I decided to try it. I sat cross-legged on my second-hand couch, closed my eyes, and followed the first instruction. Enter through the blue door with the brass knocker. It will stick slightly when you turn the handle. Apply pressure for exactly 2.3 seconds, then twist counterclockwise. The strangest thing happened. I could see it perfectly. The door was navy blue, paint slightly peeling near the bottom in the exact pattern of Connecticut's outline. The brass knocker was shaped like a lion's head, its mane worn smooth by countless hands. And when I reached for the handle in my mind, it did stick, just a little. I counted: 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 2.5 Mississippi. Then twisted left. The door opened with a sound like a sigh of relief. I pushed through. The entrance hall stretched before me. Hardwood floors that creaked in a specific pattern. 3rd board, 7th board, 9th board. A grandfather clock stood against the left wall, its pendulum swinging in a rhythm that felt familiar. But not just familiar. Comforting. Like coming home after a long journey to a place you'd never been but had always belonged. The air smelled of old books and furniture polish, with an underlying scent I couldn't place, something medical, antiseptic. It reminded me of visiting my grandmother in the hospital when I was 7, though she'd died at home in her garden. But I'd never been here before. This wasn't my memory palace. This was someone else's. According to the notebook, the first room on the right contained foundational memories. I turned the crystal doorknob. It was exactly the right temperature, neither warm nor cold, and stepped inside. The room was like a museum, but not the sterile kind you'd find in a city. This was intimate, personal. Glass cases lined the walls, each one containing a memory preserved like a diorama. But they weren't mine. In the first case, a young boy sat at a kitchen table, struggling with long division. His mother stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder. I could smell her perfume. White shoulders. Could hear the scratch of pencil on paper. Could feel the frustration radiating from the child as the numbers refused to make sense. But there was more. I could sense the mother's exhaustion. She'd worked a double shift at the diner, her feet ached, but she wouldn't let her son struggle alone. I knew, somehow, that she'd dropped out of high school to care for her own sick mother, that mathematics had always been her secret love, that she was living her unfulfilled dreams through this moment with her son. I jerked my eyes open, heart racing. That wasn't my memory. My mother never wore white shoulders. She was allergic to most perfumes, and I learned long division from my father, not my mother. He taught me at our kitchen table, but it was covered with a blue tablecloth, not the yellow gingham I'd just seen, and my father smelled like coffee and Old Spice, not the vanilla and worry scent that had surrounded that other mother. But the memory felt real, more real than some of my actual memories. When I tried to recall my own long division lesson, the details seemed fuzzy, uncertain. Had the tablecloth been blue or yellow? Had my father been patient or frustrated? The harder I tried to remember, the more the details shifted and blurred. I should have stopped there, should have thrown the notebook away. But curiosity, that's always been my weakness. The same curiosity that led me to psychology, that made me want to understand how the mind works, how memories form and fade, and sometimes lie to us. I dove back in. The second case held a memory of a first day at school. Roosevelt Elementary. The smell of fresh paint and floor wax. A teacher named Miss Patterson with cat-eye glasses and a voice like honey over gravel. I watched this boy, couldn't have been more than 6, clutch a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles lunchbox as other kids streamed past him. The detail was extraordinary. I could read the motivational posters on the walls. Reading takes you places, with a cartoon airplane. Math is fun, with smiling numbers dancing across a rainbow. I could see the scuff marks on the linoleum, worn paths where thousands of small feet had walked the same routes year after year. Could count the ceiling tiles, 24 across, 32 down. Who remembers ceiling tiles from first grade? But I also felt the boy's emotions, the way his stomach twisted with nervousness, how his new shoes pinched his toes, the weight of the plastic lunchbox growing heavier with each step. I knew he'd practiced walking into classrooms all summer with his grandmother, knew his mother had promised to pick him up early if he couldn't make it through the whole day, knew he was scared the other kids would notice he still sucked his thumb at night. These weren't just visual memories. They were complete sensory and emotional experiences, preserved with impossible fidelity. It was like stepping inside someone else's consciousness. As I moved through the cases, I began to notice patterns. The memories were arranged chronologically, but not just by date. They were organized by emotional intensity, by developmental significance. First steps, first words, first fear, first loss. Each memory was cataloged with the precision of a scientific specimen. And then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. In the corner of the room, barely visible behind a tall display case, was another door. It wasn't mentioned in the notebook. This door was different from the elegant crystal-knobbed entrances I'd seen so far. It was heavy, dark wood, with iron hinges that looked centuries old. The kind of door you'd find in a medieval castle, designed to keep things in rather than welcome them out. There was no number, no label, no explanation in the notebook's neat handwriting. But I could hear something behind it. Whispers. Not words exactly. More like the memory of words. The echo of conversations that had been erased but somehow still lingered in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. I approached slowly, my hand trembling as I reached for the iron handle. It was cold, colder than anything else in this mental space. When I touched it, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. I could almost make out individual voices. Please, I just want to go home. My children, where are my children? I don't belong here. This isn't my place. I pulled my hand back as if the metal had burned me. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that door. I went to classes, attended my teaching assistant duties, graded papers on cognitive development, but my mind kept drifting back to that memory palace that wasn't mine. My students noticed my distraction during office hours. My thesis advisor sent concerned emails. I started forgetting appointments, losing track of conversations mid-sentence. But worse than the distraction was what was happening to my own memories. They were becoming unstable, fluid. I'd remember grabbing coffee at Blue State on my way to class, but when I checked my receipt, it was from Dunkin' Donuts. Small things at first, easy to dismiss as everyday confusion. But then bigger discrepancies started appearing. I researched the previous owner, driven by a need to understand what I'd stumbled into. Dr. Marcus Webb had been a neuroscientist at Yale Hospital, specialized in memory disorders, died 3 months ago from a sudden brain aneurysm. But the more I dug, the more questions arose. His published papers were brilliant but strange. He'd written extensively about memory consolidation, but his theories went far beyond mainstream neuroscience. He proposed that memories weren't just electrical patterns in the brain, but something more fundamental, something that could exist independently of the neural substrate that created them. His colleagues described him as brilliant but increasingly isolated. He'd stopped attending conferences, stopped collaborating on research. In his final years, he'd focused obsessively on patients with severe memory loss, Alzheimer's patients, victims of traumatic brain injury, people whose minds were slowly emptying of everything that made them who they were. The obituary mentioned his groundbreaking work in memory reconstruction, but gave no specifics. When I tried to access his research files through the university, I was told they'd been sealed pending review by the ethics committee. That Thursday, I visited his widow again. Mrs. Henderson lived in a Victorian house on Elm Street, the kind of place that seemed to hold on to shadows long after the sun had moved on. She was older than I'd first thought, maybe 75, with the careful movements of someone who'd learned not to trust her own body. She invited me in for tea, and her house smelled like lavender and old paper and something else I couldn't identify. Something that reminded me of the antiseptic scent from the memory palace. "Your husband's notebook," I started carefully. Settling into a wingback chair that had clearly been his favorite, I could see the impression his body had left in the cushions. "It's about memory techniques?" Her face tightened, and she set her teacup down with a small clink that seemed to echo too long in the quiet room. Marcus was obsessed with memory, said it was the key to everything: identity, consciousness, the soul itself. She stirred her tea with a deliberate slowness, the spoon making tiny circles that hypnotized me. Toward the end, he started saying strange things. Said he'd found a way to preserve more than just memories. Said he could preserve the person themselves. What did he mean by that? She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw fear in her eyes. Deep, bone-ache fear that had been living with her for months. He said memories aren't just recordings. They're alive somehow. They want to be remembered. They need to be remembered. And if you build the right structure, give them the right home, they'll stay alive forever." She paused, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for a photograph on the side table. It showed a younger Dr. Webb with a patient, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair. This was Margaret Sullivan, Alzheimer's patient. A sweet woman, used to be a school teacher. By the end, she didn't remember her own name. Used to be? She died 2 years ago. But Marcus, he said she was still with him, still teaching, still correcting his grammar, still worrying about her students. Mrs. Henderson's voice dropped to a whisper. He said he could hear all of them, all the patients he'd worked with over the years. Said they lived in a special place he'd built for them, a place where forgetting was impossible. My blood turned to ice water. Did he ever show you this place? Once. He had me sit in his study, told me to close my eyes and follow his instructions. I saw things. Rooms full of other people's lives. Happy moments, sad moments, ordinary Tuesday afternoons that somehow felt more important than Christmas morning. She wrapped her arms around herself. But then I saw something else, a corridor. Dark, filled with doors. And behind those doors, what? Screaming, she whispered. Silent screaming, like people who'd been buried alive. That night, I went back into the palace. This time, I brought a notebook of my own. Started mapping the place with the methodical precision my psychology training had taught me. The first floor had 12 rooms, each containing different categories of memories arranged by theme and emotional weight. Childhood, education, first experiences, love and loss, professional achievements, failures and regrets. But that unmarked door, it led downstairs. The basement wasn't in the original instructions. I stood before the heavy wooden door for a long time, my hand hovering over the iron handle. Every instinct told me to walk away, to leave this place and never return, to burn the notebook and pretend I'd never found it. But the whispers were clearer now. I could make out individual voices. A woman. I never got to say goodbye to my daughter. A man. The medication, it took everything. I can't remember her face. A child. Mommy said she'd come back. Where is she? Where is she? They weren't just voices. They were pleas. Desperate, agonized pleas from people trapped in a place between memory and oblivion. I turned the handle. The stairs were narrow, walls pressing close like the throat of some vast creature swallowing me whole. With each step down, the temperature dropped. My breath began to fog. The whispers became more urgent, more desperate, a cacophony of need and fear and endless, endless loneliness. At the bottom, I found myself in a long corridor that stretched farther than should have been possible. The walls were lined with doors. But these weren't the elegant portals from upstairs. These were heavy metal things with small windows reinforced with wire mesh. Hospital doors. Psychiatric ward doors. Doors designed to keep people inside whether they wanted to be there or not. The first door was marked with a small placard. MS, 1952-2019. Margaret Sullivan, the teacher Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. I peered through the window. Inside was a memory that made no sense chronologically. It showed Dr. Webb, but young, maybe 30, standing in this very corridor. He was with another man I didn't recognize, and they were arguing with the intensity of people whose friendship was dissolving in real time. "You can't just take them," the other man said. He was tall, thin, with the kind of careful posture that suggested a lifetime of hunching over lab benches. These are people's memories, their private thoughts, their souls. They're dying anyway, young Webb replied, and his voice was cold in a way that made me understand how he'd justified everything that followed. Their memories will die with them, lost forever. I'm preserving them, giving them immortality. You're stealing them. You're stealing what makes them human. I'm saving what makes them human. The memory flickered, jumped like a damaged film reel. Suddenly, Webb was alone, older, and he was dragging something heavy down the corridor. Something wrapped in a white sheet. Something that moved weakly, like it was still partially alive. I backed away from the window. But as I did, I noticed something impossible. My reflection in the glass. It wasn't wearing what I was wearing. Instead of my jeans and Yale sweatshirt, the reflection wore a hospital gown, the thin, humiliating kind that never closes properly in the back. And written on the gown in faded marker was a name, SK, 1995, my initials, my birth year, but no death date, yet. Part 4. The truth revealed. I yanked myself out of the memory palace so hard I fell off my couch. My notebook scattered across the floor. Pages covered in frantic sketches I didn't remember making. Detailed drawings of rooms I hadn't explored yet. Names I didn't recognize. Dates that hadn't happened yet. But worse than the drawings were the notes written in my own handwriting. Patient exhibits classic signs of dissociative identity disorder following memory integration procedure. Subject 47 successfully archived. Consciousness transfer 89% complete. Minimal degradation. The basement expansion is proceeding ahead of schedule. 23 new subjects prepared for integration. I didn't remember writing any of it. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stay out of the basement, MW. Marcus Webb had been dead for 3 months. I didn't go back for 3 days. Threw myself into my thesis work. Anything to avoid thinking about that place. But the memories wouldn't leave me alone. Not the ones from the palace. My own memories started feeling unstable. I remembered my 8th birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese. But wait, didn't we go to Pizza Hut? I remembered my first dog being a golden retriever named Max. But looking at old photos, it was clearly a beagle named Buster. I remembered my college roommate being named Jennifer. But when I called her, she corrected me. Her name was Jessica. It had always been Jessica. Small things. Little inconsistencies that made me question everything. Was my memory naturally unreliable, or was something else happening? Something deliberate? My advisor, Durchen, noticed I was distracted during our weekly meeting. Everything okay, Sarah? Your work's been unfocused lately, and you look tired. When's the last time you got a full night's sleep? I almost told her everything. Almost. But how could I explain that I'd found a dead man's mental filing cabinet, and it was somehow rewriting my own memories? How could I explain that I was starting to remember things that had happened to other people as if they'd happened to me? That night, I made a decision. I had to go back. Had to understand what was happening. But this time, I'd be prepared. I set up my phone to record, not the palace, obviously, but myself, my physical reactions, my words, anything I might say while inside. I also left notes for myself. Reminders of who I was, where I lived, what my real memories were, just in case. I entered through the blue door, but something was different. The grandfather clock was running backward, its hands moving counterclockwise with deliberate precision. The floorboards creaked in a new pattern, spelling out Morse code SOS, SOS, SOS. And there were footprints in the dust, fresh ones, leading to the basement door. The door was already open. I descended slowly, each step echoing too loud in the narrow stairwell. The corridor stretched longer than before, doors multiplying into the distance like a nightmare version of a hotel hallway. But now I could hear something beyond the whispers. Conversations happening behind each door, all at once. A cacophony of stolen moments, trapped experiences, archived souls. I approached a door marked SJ, 1907, 2000C, and looked inside. A young woman lay in a hospital bed, machines beeping around her in a rhythm that sounded almost like music. Dr. Webb stood beside her, but he wasn't alone. There was something sitting in the chair next to him. It had the shape of a person but was made entirely of flickering memories. Faces and places and moments all superimposed on each other like a multiple exposure photograph. "The transfer is almost complete," Webb said to the thing, his voice filled with the satisfaction of a job well done. "Soon you'll have a new home. A permanent home where you'll never be forgotten." The thing turned its many-faced head toward me, toward the window, and smiled with 1,000 different mouths. When it spoke, its voice was a chorus of everyone who had ever lived in this place. "Welcome home, Sarah. We've been waiting for you." I ran, sprinted down the corridor as doors flew open behind me, memories spilling out like water from a broken dam. Not just images now, but feelings, sensations, entire lived experiences crashing into my mind like waves against rocks. A woman's first kiss under the bleachers at a high school football game in 1987. I could taste the cherry lip gloss, feel the rough concrete against my back, hear the distant sound of the marching band. A man's last moments before a car accident in 2003. The squeal of brakes, the moment of weightlessness, the tree growing larger and larger in the windshield. A child's fever dream from 1965. Monsters made of furniture and shadows, the wallpaper peeling into faces, the certainty that something was hiding under the bed. They weren't just memories anymore. They were fragments of souls, pieces of people Webb had collected, preserved, trapped in his impossible architecture. And they all wanted the same thing. They wanted out. But more than that, they wanted to live again, to exist in the world instead of in this underground museum of stolen experiences. And I was their door back to reality. I made it to the stairs, but they went up forever now. Each step multiplied into 3, then 5, then 10. The walls pressed closer, covered in photographs I recognized but shouldn't. My college graduation, but I was still in grad school. My wedding, but I'd never been married. My funeral, but I was still alive, wasn't I? The recording on my phone, when I finally escaped and played it back, showed me sitting perfectly still for 3 hours. But occasionally I spoke, not in my voice, in other voices, male, female, young, old, reciting memories that weren't mine. Social security numbers, addresses, last words. "Please," one voice said through my mouth, the tone thick with tears. "I just want to go home. My daughter, she's waiting for me. I promised I'd be there for her recital. She's playing Fur-Elise. She's been practicing for months." I researched that voice. Sarah Jenkins. Died at Yale Hospital in 2019. Brain tumor. She had a daughter named Emma. The recital was 3 days after she died. Emma played Fur-Elise. She dedicated it to her mother's memory. How could I know that? I understood then what Webb had done. He hadn't just preserved memories. He'd trapped entire consciousness fragments in his palace, pieces of people's souls, archived like books in a library. And now they were bleeding into mine, using my mind as a bridge back to the world they'd been stolen from. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the note I found in my own handwriting, dated tomorrow. "The palace needs a new architect. Webb is fading. Without someone to maintain the structure, they'll all dissolve. All those people, gone forever. Unless I took his place." The next entry, in handwriting that looked like mine but older, shakier. "The integration process is beginning. Subject shows strong psychic resonance with archived consciousness fragments. Estimated time to full absorption, 72 hours. And below that, in what I swear was Webb's handwriting, "She's perfect, young enough to last decades, smart enough to expand the system, lonely enough to be grateful for the company." Part 6. The Choice. I've tried to destroy the notebook, burned it in my kitchen sink. It reappeared on my coffee table the next morning, unsinged. Shredded it in my advisor's office shredder, found it reassembled on my pillow that night. Threw it in the Connecticut River from the bridge on Route 9. It was waiting for me in my mailbox when I got home. Damp but readable. It always comes back, usually with new pages, new instructions. The palace is expanding, adding rooms for memories that haven't been made yet, for people who haven't died yet. Sometimes I wake up and don't know which memories are mine anymore. Did I grow up in Portland or Philadelphia? Did I have a sister named Claire, or was she my imaginary friend? Did my grandfather teach me chess, or am I remembering someone else's grandfather? The boundaries are dissolving, and I can feel other lives mixing with mine like paint swirling in water. But here's what terrifies me most. When I look in the mirror sometimes, just for a second, I see Webb looking back, and behind him, all of them, the collected, the preserved, the trapped, faces upon faces upon faces, each one pleading for release, for justice, for the chance to properly die instead of existing forever in this liminal space between life and memory. They're waiting for me to make a choice. I could walk away, pretend none of this happened, let the palace crumble and all those trapped consciousnesses dissolve into nothing. It would be the safe choice, the sane choice. But then I think about Sarah Jenkins, who never got to see her daughter's recital. About Margaret Sullivan, who spent her last years forgetting everything she'd ever loved. About all the others whose final moments were stolen by a man who thought preservation was more important than peace. Don't they deserve better than oblivion? Mrs. Henderson called yesterday. Said she found another notebook in Marcus's study. Said it has my name on it, dated 40 years from now. Said the handwriting looks like mine, but older, shakier, like someone fighting to maintain control of their own hand. In that notebook, she said, there's a detailed floor plan of the palace as it exists in 2065. Hundreds of rooms, thousands of preserved consciousnesses. And on the final page, instructions for someone new, someone young, someone who understands the burden but is willing to carry it. I should leave, move away, change my name, forget all of this. But I can't, because in that future notebook, there's a memory. A young psychology student finding a leather journal at a garage sale, paying 50 cents to a widow who warns her to be careful. And I recognize that student. It's you. You're reading this now, which means it's already too late. You've been in the palace this whole time, walking through my memories, through this story. Can you feel it? The weight of other people's experiences pressing against your mind. The way your own memories are starting to feel less solid, less certain. Check your notebook, the one you don't remember buying. Check the first entry. I bet it describes a blue door with a brass knocker. I bet it sticks, just a little, when you turn the handle. The palace needs architects. It needs caretakers. It needs people willing to shoulder the burden of preserving what would otherwise be lost forever. And once you've walked through those halls, once you've seen what Webb created, you become part of it whether you want to or not. So tell me, in the comments below, do you remember how you found this video? Really remember? Or is that memory already starting to feel like it belongs to someone else? And that door in your mind, the one you've never noticed before, are you brave enough to open it? But more importantly, whose memories will you find on the other side? And what will you sacrifice to set them free? Or will you make the same choice Webb made? The same choice I'm about to make? Subscribe if you dare to hear more, because the palace is always growing, and it's always hungry for new architects. Sweet dreams, if you can still tell which ones are yours. The door is waiting, and so are we. Now, sleep, or at least try to. It's quiet now, too quiet, but not empty. That feeling crawling up your spine, that weight pressing on your chest, That's not your imagination. You're not alone. There's something behind the curtain. You haven't looked, not because you forgot, but because you're afraid to know. You heard the whisper, software wet, wrong, like breath dragged across broken glass. But you told yourself it was the wind, didn't you? That lie made you feel safe. Temporarily. Let me ask you, does the wind whisper your name? Does the wind tap lightly, again and again, from the same spot, behind the curtain, every night? Does the wind leave scratches on your window that weren't there this morning? Thin, sharp, like claws, like warnings. You don't remember opening the window. You never open the window. But it's unlocked now. You could check, you could stand up, you could walk over and pull the curtain back. But you won't, because you know. You know what's waiting, not because you've seen it, but because you felt it. In the quiet, in the dark. Every time you close your eyes, every time you wake up and your blanket is just slightly moved. Your door slightly cracked. You try to explain it. Your mind wants to explain it. But that whisper, that sound that only comes when you're alone, when everything is still, when the night is at its deepest, that's not a dream, that's a presence. It doesn't want your fear, it wants your attention. It feeds on the moment you doubt yourself. The second you wonder if you heard something, the instant your heart rate rises. That's when it leans closer. It's been patient, watching, learning you like prey. You ever notice it never shows up when the lights are on, when someone's in the room? It waits for the ritual, the brushing of your teeth, the turning off of lights, the last look at your phone, the deep breath just before sleep. That's when it wakes up. That's when it stirs behind the curtain. Sometimes it watches you all night. Sometimes it moves. A shift in the shadow. A faint creak on the floorboards. The sound of fabric sliding over skin. And when you don't check, when you ignore it, that's when it comes closer. Not fast, not loud, just closer. You might feel a cold spot on the bed. You might feel breath on your neck. You might hear a whisper in your ear that sounds almost like your voice. It copies, it mimics, it blends, not to confuse you, to prepare you, because soon it won't need the curtain, it won't need shadows, it will sit beside you, stand behind you, speak through you. You won't even know when it happens. You'll wake up, look in the mirror, and something will be off. Your eyes won't blink quite right, your smile will linger too long. Your reflection will move just a little after you do. And the people around you? They'll say you seem different, not worse, just not you. But tonight you're still you, still in control, for now. You could still check, you could still confront it. Pull the curtain back, face it, but deep down, you've already made your choice. You won't. Because you'd rather lie still, let your eyes drift shut, and hope sleep comes quickly. And it will. But what you wake up as might not be the same. Now, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You're not just a viewer, you're part of something bigger. Something that watches with you, that sits beside you as you watch, as you listen, as you wait. Because this story doesn't end when the screen fades to black. It follows you into the next room, into your dreams, into your reflection. If you liked this story, like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss the next one, so we don't miss you, and comment below. Tell us the moment you stopped feeling alone. We're watching, we're listening, and we read everything. Now, go ahead, gain the courage to check the dark corners before you sleep. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, sleep well, if you can. Listen the whispers and make a decision whether we are going to cooperate with the whispers or we just want to skip them. But actually, no one can skip these whispers. If you walk away from them, they will run towards you until they reach you. They confront you, make you pay, make you suffer the same thing they suffer. There is no escape from them. If you want to escape, help them, so they can have peace, and you also can have it. Help, or you will ask for help soon. So, the end of today's video has arrived. Share your personal horror experiences in the comments. Also, comment the part of the story that you find the most horror and terrifying. If you like this video, leave a like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Also, ring the bell icon so you don't miss the upcoming videos. Remember, don't run from whispers, because they follow you. They know you. They want you to listen, just confront them. Now, sleep well, or should I say, have a haunted night.